I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not schizophrenic. Aloha nerds, and welcome back to TheSalawag's Why It's Great. I'm your host, TheSalawag, and on this show I discuss the filmmaking techniques and storytelling choices that make my favorite films great. You can do your own Why It's Great about your favorite films. I'm talking about my favorite films. And on this episode, I really wanted to talk about Back to the Future Part 2. Now, you might wonder, why Part 2? Why wouldn't you do Part 1? Well, frankly, everyone knows Part 1 is great. If you don't know why Back to the Future Part 1 is great, I suggest you watch it. And if you have watched it and still don't think it's great, well, I'm sorry, welcome to Part 2. But one of the things that makes these movies great, specifically, is Bob Zemeckis' understanding of setups and payoffs. You know, when it came to the first movie, Robert Zemeckis understood that if you want to create a storyline in which this kid from the 80s goes back to the 50s and invents rock and roll and skateboarding, then earlier in the movie, you need to set up that he likes those things too. So when Back to the Future Part 1 starts off, you get this nice establishing close-up of all these clocks, visually trying to set you up for thinking about time, how time is going to be important to the movie. We also get a close-up of Marty's feet as he enters the building. We don't even see his face immediately. We see his feet, we see him kick up a skateboard, we see him plug an a guitar into an amp, and all of this visually tells us what this guy does and what he likes. Not a single line of dialogue, but you understand Marty McFly likes skateboarding and rock and roll. And he's in this guy's house, who's not his house, who's clearly some kind of inventor, all described visually through the camera. Not a single line of dialogue, but you understand what's going on because you're a smart person and you're watching what's going on. And that philosophy is taken into Part 2 to the nth degree. When Back to the Future Part 1 ends, we get this scene where Doc shows up and he picks up Marty and his girlfriend Jennifer and tells them, we have to go back to the future, there's something wrong. And Marty says, what, do we become assholes? And he says, no, it's your kids. Now this scene is reshot for Part 2, and it becomes the opening of Part 2. And when it's reshot, 2 things specifically are changed. Or technically 3. The actress who played Jennifer in Part 1 was replaced by Elizabeth Shue, and this little moment of, we have to go back to the future, something's wrong. What, do we become assholes? And this time around, Doc Brown has a little bit of more hesitation when he responds, like, no, it's your kids. And, you know, it is his kids, but that hesitation is for you, as the audience member, for you to understand that things have changed, something's wrong, specifically with Marty, and pay attention to it. And not only that, but when they leave, we get this new shot of Biff coming out. Now, in the first movie, we were introduced to Biff. He's an asshole who's got power over Marty's dad. But when Marty goes back into the past and influences Dad to have a little more scrote, George McFly knocks out Biff, and the changed future features a George McFly who is confident, who is in charge, who's writing science fiction books, and he's very successful. And it features a 50-year-old Biff who is a hunchback and who's slaving over George McFly's car, and he even is nice to Marty. So this is the hunchback that we're meeting. He hobbles out of the house and he's like, Marty, look, I made new auto detailing. I made a new auto detail matchbox, you know, and that too, within that is a setup, you know. So we're getting multiple setups right there. But he's, that hunchback Biff of 1980s witnesses the DeLorean fly off. And, if it was just supposed to be a casual moment of someone sort of not knowing what's going on and we're never going to see them again, it would have just stopped in that medium shot of just him going. But he says, "What the hell's going on here?" And the camera pushes in from medium to close-up. And we see the close-up of Biff's face in awe and wonder. And we know that even though he could say that he saw this and it wouldn't mean anything to anybody else. Like, okay, you're crazy, Biff. But by pushing into that close-up, that tells you as an audience member to think about, this guy's really thinking about what he saw. And then now there's going to be a whole gap where we don't know what he actually did with that information. And we'll find out nothing. But when we reach the 80s, when we reach the future of 2015, we see old Biff is still a hunchback, and now he's humbly working for his grandkids, slaving for his grandkids, and that is today's world for sure. But in doing that, you see this is a different Biff. Like, old Biff is kind of wiser, he's kind of smarter now, but he's has kind of a really sad menial life. Menial, working for his own, even his own family doesn't respect him. And it's sort of all injustice to his behavior as a young person, but certainly it was just, he's not a happy guy. And when Marty, after, finding the almanac, he gets even the whole plot of Biff taking the almanac and all that is set up. Each thing, you see where the idea generates and you see how the idea germinates. So you see Marty looking at the Cubs winning the World Series, and this guy says, "Oh, wouldn't it be great to go back and put some money on him?" And that gives Marty the idea. So Marty goes and literally just straight to it, buys an almanac, and he wants to do that himself. And the moral compass of the movie, which is Doc Brown, says, "Hey, no, don't do that. This is not what I built the time machine for. I just wanted to see where we were going and if maybe help ourselves out, just out of trouble, but not get into trouble. This would be getting into trouble." And during that scene, throughout the movie, old Biff sees the DeLorean. He's like, "Wait, I've seen that car before. I haven't seen that in 30 years. And while Marty and Doc are arguing about what to do with the almanac, there's a shot that's a two-shot medium on both Marty and Doc, and they're just sort of looking, it's just facing a building, right? And Doc is talking and saying, "Oh, this is not right, we're in trouble, blah, blah, blah." And you don't even really notice it, but old Biff walks in the background. He just passes in the background, and he's trying to be, quick and quiet. And I'd never even noticed it before. I was just watching the movie right now just so I could prepare for this video. So little things like that. Like, the director is doing that. The director is visually trying to tell you something. That more things are going on. It's not given a close-up, so your mind isn't on it, but it is happening in the frame. And directors always like to do this thing. In Bourne Supremacy, when Brian Cox was secretly the villain of the movie, before it's revealed that Brian Cox is the villain, there's a scene with Joan Allen, who's the main antagonist as far as we're led to believe. She's talking to someone, and it's on a close-up of her, and she's trying to figure out, hey, what the hell is going on here, blah, blah, blah. And Brian Cox is standing behind her over her shoulder, and he's just silently watching. And there's this sort of strangeness to his look, and we don't know what it means yet, but 20 minutes later in the movie, it'll be revealed, oh, this guy's the bad guy. He was actually doing everything in the movie. So subtle things like that. The director is always hiding something in the background. That little detail is crucial to what happens later in the movie. So we find out that old Biff follows these guys. He steals the time machine, blah, blah, blah. And it's after old Biff gets out of the time machine after returning it, before Doc and Marty can notice it was stolen, after he sort of struggles and hobbles out of the DeLorean, the camera pushes in from a medium to a close-up looking down inside of the car, and we see the top half of old Biff's cane, which is appropriately a fist. And that push into a close-up, again, it's for you, the audience, to understand. They could have used editing, but it was more dynamic and more dramatic to do that push into close-up and hold on it for a second so that you as the audience get to see, okay, this is important. This is going to be there for later. Notice, when I'm talking about setups and payoffs, I'm talking about close-ups as well. The choice of the close-up is there to set you up, to give importance to what you're looking at. And so you'll notice a lot of times in the emotional moments in movies that you remember, there's always a close-up on someone or on something that's important, some kind of detail. Silence of the Lambs, early on establishes that the killer that all the FBI is looking for uses these moths, and then we forget about it for the entire movie. At the very end, when they still don't have the guy, the hero just happens to be looking at a painting on the wall of someone she's interviewing, and the same exact moth is on the wall. And so, but it's shown in close-ups. So close-ups are very important in establishing these setups, because that is the director's tool for communicating to you, the audience member, that something is of importance. So if you're tracking this as a filmmaker, you're noticing these types of things right there for the benefit of increased communication. Filmmaking is all about communication. Now, all that very, very plot-based setups and payoffs, very important for the plot. But at the same time, let me check my timer. Okay, good. But simultaneously, this movie has to tell us an actual story. And what I hate about when people review things is that they always generalize. It's like the first one is original, and the second one is a piece of shit, or the second one is just a copy, and they don't actually sit there and analyze it. And it's like part 2 is really crucial, because if you think about it, part 1, Marty McFly himself does not have a character arc. Marty McFly stays the same. But in part 2 and 3, Marty McFly does have a character arc, and it's very important that he does, because now he has to carry 2 more movies. And we actually get to see his story in this movie. It's disjointed, so you don't, because of the nature of the movie is time travel, it's disjointed, so you don't get to see it in a chronological way that makes you know that that's the real story of the movie. But if you look about it, going into the future, again, the setup of, are we assholes? No, it's your kids. When we see Marty's future, we see it through Jennifer. Jennifer is the one who discovers that in hiding from her future family, she discovers that Marty gets fired because he can't handle hearing, "Are you a chicken?" from someone who wants him to do something illegal. And after messing up and getting fired, Jennifer's the one who gets the printout piece of paper. And she's the one who sees Marty in a moment of sadness, trying to deal with it, trying to play his guitar, and he can't play, and it's in a close-up of her face. That's when she's trying to sneak away, but on close-up she turns and looks when she hears Marty can't play guitar anymore. And that's important to her, because she knows how good of a guitar player he is. She didn't have to see the first movie to know that Marty McFly was a great guitar player. She already knew, because she was dating him. She knows what he's good at. So hearing him play that and getting that close-up, that gives her an angle. While she's not getting a character arc, she's getting an angle. And not only that, earlier in the movie was another setup where when they first appear in the future, it's the doc it's Jennifer who's saying, we get to see our family, we get to see if we have kids, we get to see our wedding. Did we have a big wedding? And all those lines are there. They're cute. They feel like good character touches, but it's still set up for what we're going to find out later. Because later on, she finds the picture that they get married in the chapel o' love. So the characters are being set up at the same time as the plot is being set up, but you're paying attention to the special effects and the action and the plot, because the plot is always explained. When I was in film school, one of the things I was taught was that the plot is the external goal, and the story is the character's internal goal. So it's internal. It's not necessarily spoken. In a drama, it's all spoken. So you know that it's drama. But in a science fiction and action context, you don't get that explanation always of the character's story. You might get some exposition, but not the actual explanation. So they don't exactly explain what it is, but, Marty's mom in the future is explaining, hey, he was in some horrible accident and broke his hand, and he got charges pressed against him, and it was a really hard time. But we don't know exactly what the accident was. It's hinted. But we know that it's all tied to this problem Marty has of not being able to back down when someone challenges him. And it's something that he consistently fails to do throughout the second movie and most of the third movie. He can't back down when he's challenged. And it takes going to the past, to the way past, and meeting Marty's great-grandparents and having that talk of, look, people won't think less of you if you just say no. It doesn't really matter if they do. At least you did what felt right to you. And Marty had to really hear those words because, as much as the doc is trying to warn him morally, he needed to hear those right words that could access the part of his brain to tell him to stop doing that. And he had to get it from his own family. He had to get it from his own blood, his own source of self. And that's too is what Doc Brown says in part 3 is like, we all have choices to make, and you have to make your own. I can't just tell you what happens. You have to figure out for yourself what to do and what's right for you. So this is the sort of filmmakers being very strong moral compasses to their own characters. They're trying to be good moral compasses to, this time knowing that they have an audience, that they know kids are going to be watching this. They want to make sure you understand, like, they aren't just saved by the machine. And even Back to the Future was never intended to be an insane science fiction picture. They only had time travel because they just wanted to tell the story of a kid meeting his parents at the same age as he was and finding out that he wouldn't have liked them at that time either. And time travel was just the method of doing that. And they just didn't want to do the hokey stuff of, at the time of the 80s and 90s, time travel was not typically done with machines. It was done because someone fell asleep or got into a hot tub or hypnotized or some silly weird stuff like that. And they're like, we just want something that the audience will buy when they're watching the movie, and that's why it's a time machine. It wasn't even a car. It was a freaking refrigerator. So that shows you how things change throughout filmmaking to get you to the same place. So I wanted to talk about setups and payoffs just because I think that's a crucial part of filmmaking. And not a required part of filmmaking. 28 Days Later, they had an ending where the main character got killed at the end of that movie. But they watched that movie and were like, that's really bleak and depressing. Let's change that. Let's do a reshoot and make him live. But in this case, they knew, Bob Zemeckis and company really knew where they wanted to go. And they did all the hard work of setting up all those pieces so that you could feel resolved at the end of 3, so that it could all tie together really well. And not every movie's made that way, but Back to the Future Part 2 and 3 were. So, setups and payoffs. That is why this movie's great. And the aforementioned great performances, because you don't even get a quality movie like this without great fucking performances and great direction. So, hats off, team. Thank you.